please, hang on. Okay, so can you guys who are in Facebook rather than YouTube, can you click the link that says allow permissions for me to see your name? And then I'll actually be able to see who's talking. Let me just, I'm going to copy that link and I'm just going to head over to our Facebook group and post it there. I'm pretty excited about tonight's live, guys, because one, we haven't had a live interview here in this group for quite some time. And two, this topic is just so needed. We need to delve into this topic of anxiety. It is absolutely through the roof. It has touched my own family. And I'm just so thrilled that we can talk to Kirsty tonight and really unpack this topic of this. Oh, I can hear Kirsty. Where is she? There she is. Hello. Now I'll just let you in. Here we go. Hi.
Hello. How you doing?
Good. I purposely didn't wear my blue shirt like that tonight because I knew that would be matching.
We match every time, every single time. Do I need a light or is this okay? Can you guys see me?
I've just switched screens to post this link in, but from memory, you looked great.
Okay, cool. I normally have a light, but it's upstairs, so.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. 1 second.
Hello, everyone. I can see all your comments coming through. It's lovely to see you all.
Good. I'm glad that you can see what's going on because I've switched screens. I've got no idea.
Oh, okay. I'm here.
All right. Now I've just closed all that down. All right. Welcome. Kirsty, it's been ages since I've seen you.
I know.
Even though we're currently running a fiber challenge together. Next week we'll be doing a Q&A over in the fiber challenge group.
Yes.
To chat to Kirsty 2 weeks in a row, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about that.
We may see some of those fiber challenge peeps over in this interview tonight because I forgot to omit them from the invitation to come along tonight. So I did let you guys know in the Facebook group, though, if you're in the fiber challenge, this interview tonight is completely separate from the fiber challenge. It is not part of the content, but it's just a great little value add. If you want to come along, then you are obviously more than welcome. We would just love to see as many people as we can here tonight because, like I was saying just before Kirsty joined us, anxiety is just such a huge problem. Kirsty would know even more than I do, but even in my own family, it has touched us. And I was looking at some stats from 2019. So that was 2 years ago before COVID hit. And so obviously things will have changed significantly since then.
Yeah.
But what that report was saying was that actually 14% of Australians over the age of 16 suffer from anxiety, which makes it the most prevalent mental health disorder that there is.
Mm. It's so sad, and I would love to see the stats for under 16 because as within the last 2 years, because there is stats, from 2019, but it would have changed so significantly as family dynamics change, as lockdowns have happened, as changes in schools and what conversations that kids are listening to, and there's just so much that's happening for our kids as well as for the adults in their lives. So yeah, I mean, can you imagine the percentages now? It'd be really interesting to see what comes out, like what research comes out of this. But it's just everywhere. I mean, I'm in consults day in, day out, and it's the highest kind of conversation that I have at the moment. So yeah.
I imagine that most people here who have turned up tonight are touched by it, either themselves or with a family member. I would say that most of us here tonight would be touched by it. Yeah. And look, I'd love to say hello to all these beautiful people in the group. Hey, Sarah, Susie, Mishi, and there's a couple of people who I can't see their names. If you can see the link that I've shared there, and it should actually be in the post of this group. If you could just click that link, and that will allow Kirsty and I to see your name.
Yeah.
Kirsty, is that your speaker? I can hear there's a bit of feedback going.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but then when I speak, I can hear like an echo of my voice.
Yeah. I can hear that too. I thought that was your end. I've got my usual setup, so I don't know how to change it if it is me.
All right. Well, let us know in the comments, guys, if it gets a little out of control. But it's gone now, so let's hope that's okay.
There you go.
So please say hello in the comments. This is a topic that, you know, it is quite personal and close to everyone's heart. So it is a safe place to talk. This is a closed group, and we're all here with the intention of just figuring this stuff out, because the attention is being absolutely overwhelming. Sometimes you just don't know where to start. The other interesting stat that I saw from that 2019 study said that people take on average 8.5 years to seek help for their anxiety.
Oh my gosh, I haven't seen that stat. I mean, that's terrible.
I mean, you would be seeing people all the time, and so you'd see the flip side of that. But there are just countless people out there in the community who are just out there suffering alone.
Yeah.
So if we can just shine a little bit of light on the causes and the helps for anxiety tonight, then I think that will do a world of good for whoever's here.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Someone just said that they've done the mental health first aid kit, and it's such a wonderful course. So it's really lovely to see that, because I think, you know, as we need to do our first aid for, you know, resus and snake bites, I think we do need to skill up on how to have those big conversations and how to ask the questions and how to listen. It's a really hard skill to learn how to listen to someone and ask that question, are you okay? And then have that open space for someone to be able to, you know, be able to reply. And we you know, filling up that space and for it to be quiet and, you know, like really offering this wonderful environment for someone to say, no, I'm not okay. So I can't see your name. It just says Facebook user, but I'm so glad that you put that there, that you've done that mental health first aid kit, because it's awesome. It's such an awesome course to do. So well done.
Do you know that I've never heard of it? And I would love to do that, because something that I've learned in the last 12 months is that I simply don't have the tools that I thought that I would have had to help support someone through anxiety. I just don't.
Yeah.
Even though I myself have suffered with anxiety for a period of time in my life, I still found myself lacking when it came to supporting one of my children. So I would love to do that myself.
Yeah, it's a great course. I wish we didn't have to have it.
That's right. Hello, Trudy. Hello, Mishi. Oh, beautiful. All right, guys. As we said, it's a big topic. There's already a whole bunch of questions that have come through for people who can't actually make it tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to break it up into two parts tonight. First, we're going to talk about what causes anxiety. And of course, there are a myriad of reasons that anxiety might come to be in your life. And Kirsty's really well versed on what that can look like. Then the part two is going to talk about what can we do about it? How can we support? Hello, Rosie. Rosie did tell me that she wanted to come and say hello.
Oh. Hello, sweet girl. How are you? Oh, I like your tongue.
She's trying to show your apple. She's trying to
show you've got an apple.
Yes. Rosie actually did a live with me yesterday. She did the Sesame Seed Challenge. So we're looking out for the sesame seeds as to find out her personal transit time, guys.
Oh, classic.
Bye to everyone now. Goodbye. Love you. That's your daddy. He'll help you get into bed, okay? I know. Well, you can sit with me, but it's time for me to talk now, okay? But you can sit with me, but I have to keep talking. Okay. So where were we? So part two is going to be all about what can we do to support anxiety? How can we take steps to move out of that space? And it's something that has actually been a really cool experience for me this year. Really, it's only been since September.
Hasn't been long.
Has not been long.
Yeah.
Late August, one of our daughters did a stool test on Kirsty's advice, and we discovered the reason that she'd been suffering with anxiety and bloating and all of these other symptoms. And it was a textbook response, according to Kirsty. Because honestly, though, leading up to it, as a mother, I mean, anyone out there who has a child that suffers in that way, like, it is, one, it's heartbreaking. Two, you just don't know what to do. I mean, you can try all these different things and you just feel like you're stabbing in the dark. And we were guided on a program in the first 8 weeks. In the first 8 weeks.
Yeah.
In the first 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Our daughter's anxiety disappeared. Like, she was attending school 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
It was a big turnaround. So we can get into that story a little bit later on, but I'm not going to share too much about it, just for confidentiality. So I'm not going to sort of delve into the nitty gritty, but the bigger picture that I want to just communicate is that it doesn't have to be a forever thing that we suffer with. There are some real strategies out there that are tried and tested that really can help significantly. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of those things tonight, aren't we, Kirsty?
Yes. I'm going to dive on into it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're also going to allow some time for Q&A at the end. So we will need to keep things fairly high level, because Kirsty actually did like a 10-day deep dive on anxiety recently, and there's hours and hours and hours of research and science that she could delve into and get very nerdy on. And you'll see a little bit of that tonight, but we're not going to delve into things too much. We'll just try to keep things fairly straightforward. Hello, Max. Come on, Max, you say hello. Hi. Right. So now, guys, now's the time for you to definitely head off to Daddy and head to okay?
For those of you who are listening, if you want to delve in further into, so we'll kind of, as I said, keep it quite high level tonight, but if you wanted to delve in, the lectures that I did on anxiety and building resilience and the gut microbiome, they're actually up on the Cultured Wellness YouTube channel. So yeah, I've left them up there. Normally I take a lot of the lectures down just because it gets a bit disconnected, like why are they still there if we're not supporting people? But I've actually left them up there because they're just so important at this point in time. So just search Cultured Wellness in YouTube and you'll find we've actually got like a whole little folder of those lectures in there, and especially the first one. So I'll cover lots off tonight, but if you really want to jump into it, and I share some really nerdy diagrams and all sorts of stuff. So that's a great place to go after this as well.
That's really wonderful. I'm really happy about that, because I actually wanted to share your anxiety talks with a friend of mine recently, and I thought, oh, well, she's not in the group and the group's closed down, so I thought I couldn't do it. So I'll definitely put it out on YouTube.
Yeah.
So let's head into part one, the causes of anxiety. And I wanted to just first briefly touch on the role that genetics plays, because lots of us, and anyone who's done the Fiber Challenge may get a hint of what we're about to say about genetics. But lots of us can sort of look to our grandparents or our parents and say, oh, they suffered with mental health issues, so that means that I must be suffering from mental health issues because they did. And we can sort of blame our ancestors for our physical health or our mental health. So I wanted to ask you, what role does genetics play?
Yeah. So a lot less of a role than what we thought traditionally. So it was only sort of around the year 2000 that we even were able to sequence our whole genome. So it's relatively new that we even understand the implications of our genes. And so from that time when we were able to sequence our genome, we also started to understand the gut microbiome, and we started to understand that our body really is only made up of, and there's, a bit of conjecture about the actual percentage, but between sort of 10 and 20%, our body is very much comprised of our genetic material, of our DNA. So that's who we are, and we cannot change that. That's what's come through. But what we now understand is that the rest of what our body is made up of is all of these incredible microbes, whether that be bacteria or fungi or viruses. And that is actually what our body is mostly made up of. And so in this understanding of this real kind of, 70-30 or 80-20 of genetics versus microbes, then we start to get a bit of a picture that when something's going on with our body, we need to actually have a look at what our body is mostly made up of. So all of these microbes, rather than just sticking with genetics. So this is kind of where this whole exciting, awesome space of understanding the gut microbiome, the skin microbiome, the vaginal microbiome, the nasal microbiome, like the mouth microbiome, and what's going on in and on our body. And then we started to understand how they behave and what they do. And now we understand through this concept of epigenetics is how do they actually talk to our genes, and how do our genes switch on and off to either, have the predispensity of, diabetes, for example, or mental health, because that's genetically what's come down. And then how do we switch it off by looking after our body and looking after our gut microbiome and changing the landscape of our environment and our diet and how we think and how we behave. So it gives us such beautiful power than we've never really had before, because it has always been this conversation of it's genetics and we are who we are and that's all we can do. So it's very, very cool. We have this incredible ability to be able to change who we are and how our bodies behave by looking at that 80%, 90% of our body, which is microbes. So it's pretty exciting. It's very exciting.
Well, exciting. I get excited every time I listen to you talk. I learn something new, and it just is so empowering. This is a conversation that is ridiculously empowering. We can take things into our own hands largely. This is something we can action. We can make choices that will improve our life.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned epigenetics. You've mentioned being able to avoid triggering those genetic predispositions. Is now a good time, or should we do it later, talking about how we can avoid triggering that genetic predisposition? I mean, I know we've spoken about those lifestyle changes, but perhaps we're going to talk about that later when we talk about the ways that we can support.
Yeah.
Let's skip that one. But one of the things that I thought was it brought such clarity to me when listening to you speak about anxiety and the causes of it, was that basically it can be categorized into two different reasons, right? So can you explain what those two different reasons are?
You know what? As a teacher, I have a background in teaching and education, and as a teacher, when people get your analogies, it's like the best thing ever. So after I did those anxiety lectures, and people would literally come into consults, or they'd send messages, or they'd talk to me on the street, and I'd be like, I get the top down and I get the bottom up. And it was brilliant. It's just because it is that simple. So, obviously that's, what I'm thinking that you want to talk about.
Yeah, it resonated with me too. So the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach.
Yeah. Let's look at that. And literally people were using body language to do it as well, which I just loved. So this top-down and bottom-up approach is this overarching understanding that our body has this incredible nervous system. Now, we operate in two levels. We operate in a sympathetic nervous system response and a parasympathetic nervous system response. So our body is either in this state of fight or flight and run, and it's normal conversation now for people to talk about, escaping from the tiger, and it used to be the tiger running after us, and now it's an email that drops into your inbox that can blow your day away, and you can start sweating, and it's all on. The heart rate goes, and you start to really experience a full fear state. And so we have that fear state and that fight or flight, but we also have this other nervous system response, which is our rest and digest. And we want to be hanging out in our rest and digest as often as possible. And we only want to, utilize that fear state of that fight or flight for appropriate times. And so unfortunately, what we're seeing is that most people are hanging out in fight or flight all day long and actually dropping in very rarely into that rest and digest. And so it's a really overarching thing. So you've got these two sets of nervous system response. And what they can do is, if in your mind you see that email and it triggers your brain to go into that fight or flight. And then you start to come in and start to, stimulate what's called the HPA axis, which is the hippocampus, where we start to register whether we're safe and whether this is a safe environment for us to be in. Then our adrenals start to flare up, and then our pituitary gland starts to flare up. So our body kicks in, and you would all feel it. You would all know it. And, give me a thumbs up if you do. Your heart rate goes up. You start sweating. You get a bit jittery. That's when people are like, oh, man, I've got to go to the toilet. I've got the runs. And it's a really classic response because the body is preparing to go into action. And so if that's a perceived threat from an email, that's what we call the top-down approach. So this perceived threat that's our brain has registered then really impacts our gut microbiome, and it impacts our digestive system, and it impacts our body and how it behaves. So
sorry to interrupt. I remember something cool that you've said about this before, Kirsty. You said that it takes 2 hours for
Yeah. So it does. Between 20 minutes and 2 hours, you can have a perceived threat in your brain, and then it can completely change what's going on in your gut microbiome. So it can cause an inflammatory stress response in your gut, and therefore change your body's ability to digest, the pH, the environment, motility in your gut, if you've got enough stomach acid and digestive enzymes. So if you are sitting at your desk and an email comes through, and then 10 minutes later, after you've tried to calm down from it all, you start eating your lunch, there's no way you're going to digest that food. And then undigested food sitting in the gut starts to feed some worms and some parasites, and off we go into this kind of land of overgrowth and a dysbiotic gut. So we can have this top-down approach. So the perceived threat from the brain, and then that stimulates that fight or flight and completely adjusts all of our systems in our body, and especially our gut. The other way is the bottom-up approach. And that's mainly coming from whether we eat something that's inflammatory that we can't digest, or we catch something, or once again, our immune system, which is developed in our gut, perceives that there's a threat in the body. And then our immune system and our gut sort of mounts a big attack, and then stimulates this enteric nervous system in our gut, and then sends a message to the brain to say, we're on high alert, quick, we've just got to freak out. And so you can get both of these top-down and bottom-up stimulation in the body, and you can get them at the same time and all sorts, that then puts our body into this state of alarm. And if we don't shut that off, and if we don't know how to dampen that, that's our set point. And then, of course, our immune system switches off, our nervous system just completely craps out, we run out of nutrients, we can't sleep, our body just is dysfunctional, and then we end up with anxiety, and we end up with all sorts of mental health issues and also gut issues. So I'm trying, Lainey, it's the simplest I can do.
I think you're doing a great job. I remember, isn't it interesting when you connect the dots? I remember you telling these stories of some clients that you've had come through your door where they can identify a stressful, perhaps traumatic experience that they had 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the point that they've identified as things going downhill for them in their physical health. And that can be things like autoimmune conditions and IBS and all those types of things, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I'll work with someone who's 60, and they'll talk about a trauma, like a car accident. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a big trauma, but if we perceive it as a trauma, then it's a trauma. So I feel like some poor people like belittle their traumas, or like, oh, you know, my parents got divorced and I was pretty upset, but you know, people live through a lot worse. So I'm sure it's not that. But it doesn't matter what the trauma is. If the body feels it, then yeah, you start to see this little insidious kind of thing growing and growing and growing. And that's when I see people 30 years later with, you know, Hashimoto's and autoimmune conditions. But really, when I say, when was the last time that you felt well? And then the next question is, what trauma did you have around that time? It's like this like kind of moment of, oh my gosh, like, is that where this all started? And everything's just dampened and the immune system doesn't work and the brain is just on fire, just really unsure what to do.
Yeah, that's a very powerful set of questions. And I would love to ask, we've got quite a few people here tonight, if you feel comfortable to do so, we'd love to know, when was the last time that you felt amazing? And is there something around that time that you can recall that happened that was stressful or traumatic that may have set the course in motion for you? We'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, someone's written there, Susie's just written there, like, it's a classic response. Like, you literally, your throat closes over, you get breathless, you know, you just can't function. And, you know, such a classic response. And then that just impacts the gut so much. And then suddenly here we are with IBS and IBD and Crohn's and colitis and, you know, a kick on of celiac disease and so forth. So yeah, it's a poignant thought just to sit and reflect what's going on here for me. How, you know, people don't just get an autoimmune condition. You don't just get one. You know, you gotta work hard at that. You know, over a long time.
Yeah, like our body wants to help us, and it's sending us cues all the time. We have to pay attention, and sometimes it's really hard. I remember when I started going to the chiropractor that we go to, he would ask me all the time. He'd say, "Lainey, how's your body been feeling the last week or the last 2 weeks, however long it's been since I've seen him?" And I had to really sit and think that through. Like, it was unnatural for me to consider that. And it's so important for us to get in touch with how we feel.
Yeah.
Talking about, you know, you say a lot of people belittle their, say, micro traumas, we might like to say. I can say that it's that type of response for me was absolutely true. A lot of people in our community have heard that I went through like a 6-year survival mode, and it was all these little micro stresses every day. Like I said, the email, but for me, it wasn't the email. It was other things. Like, for me, I felt like I couldn't give attention to 2 of my children at once when they were talking to me, or I was trying to make dinner at the same time. And logically, I knew that wasn't an issue. I could explain it away in my mind, but my body had this anxious response that I couldn't deny, that was right up here in my chest at 5 p.m. time every night. And it went on for so long that I basically went into a state of, I forget the word for it now. You'd know what it is. I'm just trying to remember what it is. But I basically just lost all my energy, and I started to go downhill with my health.
Yeah.
So I started to build in some of these things that we'll be talking about, like the good fats and the proteins, and it really, and the sleep. Sleep. It really helps me build myself back up again. And so having some of these tools up our sleeve can be incredible. It's 8 o'clock, and let me just check on our notes here. I think that we could probably skip over to part 2. I'm going to save one of those topics we're going to cover for the Q&A at the end as one of my questions.
Okay.
So I love to hear these comments, guys. And Katrina, you are so not alone. It's been a massive couple of years, and I feel for you. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that cool? I love to read those comments, guys. I'm looking forward to reading them properly a bit later. Yes, okay. All right, so part 2. Let's talk about some solutions. Let's talk about some supports. You've already spoken about the top-down approach, and you've spoken about the bottom-up approach. Do the strategies to support anxiety differ according to what has caused the anxiety?
Yeah, so yes and no is the answer for that, really. But we want to do them all concurrently. So we want to be, putting all of these strategies in place. And so it doesn't really matter if it's a top down or a bottom up approach, because if we've got that sort of holistic look at it, it will cover all options. So when it comes to the top down approach, so our mind perceiving that there's a threat or that there's a trauma, there's just, amazing breath work, mindfulness, gratefulness, meditation, to be able to bring your body out of that state of alarm and getting your mind centered, we have all of these different amazing brain waves in our brain, and they have all different states that they work in. So you can actually bring your mind back into that calm theta state. And then you can start sitting in that executive function, which, where we want to be making our decisions from, at the front of our brain, where we can, make the right choices out of logic and understanding and love, as opposed to fear, which is, in the hippocampus, the amygdala, where it's like, what's going on? I just need to make a choice and run away. So we know that when our heart rate, for example, is over about, 70 or 80, that's, if you measure your heart rate and it's above that, you are in a state of fight or flight. And so that's quite shocking for people. Like when I get, my beautiful clients to measure their heart rate over the course of the day, it's like, oh dear, I've been above 70 all day. So, that's a great way to measure if you're in that state. And so then using your breath and taking those big, deep breaths to bring it under 70, and to be sitting and being mindful, doing some meditation, going for a walk, journaling, being grateful. It's amazing. Having grateful thoughts will drop you into a different mind state. It's so cool, and it all works. Like, it's free, it's easy, and it will drop you down into that state of rest or digest and start to change the landscape of what your body's doing.
It sounds so cliche to say, wake up in the morning and think of 3 things that you're grateful for.
Yeah, I know.
But I have experienced the effect that has. And then you can do it in a fun way around the dining table at night with your family too. You can talk about your highs and your lows, or you can talk about something you're grateful for. And it's all building that language that's so important for our kids to learn.
Absolutely. So that's your top-down approach. And then also making sure that you're putting yourself into situations that are only going to support you. So that's, really identifying relationships that support you and environments that support you, and you're not walking into these things constantly feeling like you are back into that state of alarm. And then the bottom-up approach is very much around focusing on nurturing your gut microbiome so it's not in a state of alarm. So that's taking out those inflammatory foods that are going to cause the issues. So, it's no surprising I'm going to say sugar, and it's no surprising I'm going to say, alcohol and processed foods and packet foods and, all of those sorts of things. We know that these foods aren't great for us. But when we're in a state of fight or flight, we often have a bit of an emotional connection with that food to help us feel buoyant or to be able to get over it. And look, it's in the movies. We see it everywhere. Like, oh, I'm so stressed out, I'm going to sit and eat ice cream watching TV all night. And so it's almost sort of culture, this kind of pop culture, that's how we respond to a stressful, heartbreaking situation, is to sit there and eat ice cream. Now, in that sitting there eating ice cream scenario, the amount of inflammation that ice cream causes in your gut then stimulates your immune system, then stimulates your nervous system, and then you stop producing all of your neurotransmitters that make you feel awesome. So we develop and grow and manufacture our neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and GABA. We make them from the metabolites in our gut. So you cannot feel, buoyant and resilient and joyful if your gut is inflamed. So if you've got diarrhea or you've got bloating or, you're constantly pain in your gut and feeling sore, if you've got those things going on, then absolutely without a doubt, you'll struggle with your mental health. It's not even a question. You will struggle because the factory inside your gut that makes all those buoyant, wonderful, happy moods, it comes from your gut. And so it can't make it if it hurts and painful and you've got loose stools and all of those sorts of things. So, you know, you give yourself a break. You know, it's not like, oh, I just can't pull myself together. It's like, well, of course you can't. You've got bloating and diarrhea. So let's sort that out. Let's take out the inflammatory foods. Let's rebuild a new relationship with food and a new relationship with how to soothe yourself that's not through inflammatory patterns of behavior like eating the ice cream. And for me, it was shortbreads very late at night. Shortbreads and donuts. Oh, wow. It took me ages.
We all have our vice that
yeah, it's very interesting. So
and this is where the topic of it's not you, it's your bugs that I just find so fascinating, but I also find so empowering for people, because like you've just touched on, so often we go through life thinking there's something wrong with us. We go through life thinking, how am I not coping? Everyone else seems to be doing just fine, but I can't seem to get it together.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that there is a reason for that. And
and I wouldn't normalize it and like, oh, well, I've got anxiety, or I've got depression, and so I'll just take some medication for that. That we can't normalize how often we're seeing this and how, it's just become so everyone's kind of dealing with it, and we're starting to normalize it. And what really riles me up is we're normalizing teenagers and children with anxiety. And, I'm very blessed to have a father who's 75 who is still teaching, and he started teaching at 20. So there's a very long time that he's been a teacher. And so when you start to, probe and ask questions like, when did you start seeing anxiety in your students at school? And when did you start seeing behavior issues? And when did you, and Dad's like, I hadn't even heard of these words until, 5 years ago. And suddenly, as a teacher, we're going to courses about how to deal with these things that 20 years ago, like, there might have been one kid in the class that wasn't buoyant, or, and obviously the landscape's changed and people talk more and it's more obvious and it's not so controlled. But it's really interesting talking to the old timers, and really we've come to normalize behavior that's not okay, and it's just not normal. And why is that happening? And why are we seeing these changes? And it has everything to do with our diet and our environment and our lifestyle. And that has to change to claw this back. But it's not that much to change. Like it's quite exciting to do it too.
Kirsty, the excitement that I felt around seeing my daughter's stool test was absolutely off the charts. I was speaking to you shortly afterwards going, oh my gosh, I just cannot believe this. I was more excited than she was. Being able to see on paper a scientific test of your stool that shows exactly what's going on in your gut that are causing these very specific symptoms. It's mind-blowing, and it's just so exciting to see that there is a pathway through this. We need to address ABC, because often it's just this big grey haze and we just have no idea what to do except for, hey, let's do some breath work, which is obviously very important. But
that annoys me. Exactly that. You're right. And that annoys me to no end. Is it's like, oh, just do your breath work and, go and sit under a tree, and yes, do all of that. But let's investigate and find out what's actually going on, because every single person that I've ever worked with that's had anxiety has had some dude or some bug living within their gut that is absolutely wreaking havoc, which is why it's like, it's not you, it's those bugs in there that are causing the trouble. They release so much inflammation and just a metabolic and metabolite sort of like wasteland and they cause that inflammation and they stop making those neurotransmitters. And so, yes, we need to put all these plans into place, and we need to, make the most of being mindful and all those sorts of things, but then not at the expense of finding out the reason why. So what is your vitamin D levels, and how is your zinc going? And, is your child wetting the bed all the time and having chronic, like screaming, horrific nightmares and terrors? So what's their B6 level? Have they been tested for worms and parasites? So we can get to the reason why this is happening. And so, yeah, I love it when I've got a really complex, patient we're working with, and their gut tests are a mess. Like, it's a shocker. And I'm like, yes, this is great. Yeah, because then it's, because a lot of you who will be listening, you'll understand that when there's mental health issues, you kind of get like boxed with, all we can really do for you is just, the mindfulness and medication. So it's actually really empowering when you get your test results back and it's like, yeah, so you've got biophilia Wadsworthia, you've got a fair significant amount of, D. fragilis parasite in there. It's like, yes, cool. I can do stuff about that. Like, I can action things. I can actually make a change to that. And therefore there's purpose in your recovery, as opposed to, I suppose, I'll just bring my heart rate down and let's, see how it goes. Because it's much bigger than that for people than just their breath work.
Yeah. And that's why I was so excited to actually bring you into this group tonight to discuss anxiety, because when we did the stool test for our daughter, what came back was that she had fantastic diversity in her gut, which was like, yes, that's great. But what we also found was that she had 2 particular parasites that were quite significant. They weren't just a small amount of parasites.
Oh, yeah, it was on in there. It was on, yeah.
And she also had a couple of different bacterial overgrowths that we needed to address as well. And so over the course of literally 8 weeks, we took out the foods that was feeding the parasites, which was the sugars and the refined carbs and things. And we introduced all those lovely fermented foods that you're going to tell us about in a second. And then also she introduced some herbs to kill off those parasites. And Kirsty, you can tell us the connection between parasites and anxiety in a second. But I can tell everyone here tonight that once we accomplished what the stool test indicated for us to do, then it was day and night. Like, she still has a whole bunch of stuff that we need to work on. It's not just an absolute transformation. But in terms of the anxiety, isolating that anxiety, it's gone. It's completely gone. And so she's back to school full time. She is loving school. The anxiety's not there. She's not bloating anymore. And over the last 8 weeks, she's been seeing like long dead parasites in the toilet bowl.
Yeah.
And like, it's just like visual confirmation that we're on the right track, that these progressive, things that we're noticing that have improved are real. And it's so like, you can probably feel the relief on it. Even though that we're not at the finish line yet, I see that we're on the right path. And it is just such a relief as a parent to see that, I can help this child of mine that I love so much and it's been suffering. So it's just really exciting to get that test done. And look, I can see that there's a thank you to whoever said that. I can only see it's Facebook user, but I appreciate that. Someone has said, let me just scroll up, their 6-year-old is experiencing anxiety. I can't find you now. I'm sorry that I can't remember your name, but your 6-year-old has been experiencing anxiety. You eat really well, thanks to the Whole Food Collective and Well Nourished, she says.
Yeah.
But her son's still experiencing anxiety. So what would be the next step? The next step would be, let's test that stool. Let's just see what's happening, right? Test it.
Yeah, absolutely. Test, don't guess. So you can because there was someone else that asked there. Yes, we work with kids. That's my greatest joy. I work with all ages, but kids is my jam. It's what I love most to do. So yes, we work with kids, and yes, get your test done. So you can go onto the Culture Wellness website and you can book to order we use a test called Microba Labs. And you can book that Microba test on our website and the consult that obviously needs to go with it, so you can read the results of your test. Or if you're not sure, you can just book in to see us. So I was just, Lainey and I were having a bit of a discussion in some comments on a Facebook group the other day, and normally we just see people on our gut healing programs, but considering the level of anxiety and considering that there's so much going on for everyone at the moment, we have started doing one-off consults, which at Culture Wellness, we've never ever done that before. So it's a really good space and a really good time to come and see us if you want to unpack all of those things, because we will. Like, we get the tests, we can see what's going on, we can unpack it all, and it doesn't matter what age and phase you're at. So yes, like menopause, premenopausal, all those things, they're all the things that we can work with and help you with to give you answers for why that's happening. So it's very, very, very exciting. But the next step is to make a step, so just do something. Don't, be hamstrung in that I don't know what to do next, or I don't know where to turn, or I'm unsure. And there's a lot of help out there that it isn't the traditional go to see your GP trajectory. There's a lot more that can be done, a lot of private lab testing. It's a really exciting space that, if you didn't know what was out there, like, because this is just really cool stuff you can do now that a lot of people haven't had access to or even know that it's happening.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a fair few questions coming through, but what I might do is I'll just park the questions for a moment, and because we're almost finished talking about some support, but I really want to dig into some more of those supports.
Yes.
Kirsty, what are some of the foods to welcome into our life more when we're experiencing anxiety? And we've spoken a bit about the ones to avoid.
Yes.
So let's talk about what should we be having more of?
Yeah. So with the gut microbiome, the sort of, gold standard of having an awesome gut is diversity. And so the more diversity we have, the much better it is going to support our immune system and our mental health. So to create that diversity, fermented foods is just an absolute no-brainer. So that's your sauerkrauts and your kimchi and your kiffers and, coconut yogurts and those sorts of things. So
can I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Guys, I was petrified of fermented foods. It's not as scary as it sounds. I avoided it for so long. Like, I dabbled with some sauerkraut. I even made my own at home, and I'd have a little bit here or there. But honestly, the idea of like fermenting fruits or even having cultured yogurt, I'm a little bit of I'm not very adventurous when it comes to food. I love adventure elsewhere, but in my food department, not so much.
Yeah.
And so when it came to that, I was petrified of it. But since then, I have been enjoying fermented smoothies, which sounds gross, but they're actually quite delicious. Yes, I've been enjoying a plethora of fermented things. So don't let the word fermented scare you off. It has made the world of difference in our daughter's life to have those fermented foods going in. And can you tell us why, Kirsty? What does it actually do?
Yeah, so when we talk about that diversity, it's a diversity of bacteria. And so fermented foods is just a whole array of amazing bacteria that you consume, and then it goes in and it inoculates in your gut, but it also changes the environment in your gut. It helps to digest the food that you're eating. It switches on your immune system, and it supports that, bottom up approach. So it's just an absolute must. And it's really cool to see fermented foods are all cool and, hipster these days. Like, I love that. When I first got into fermented foods, it was like the weird, German hippies that would make some kraut or something. So it's all fun and exciting now. But, you can make it at home and it doesn't have to cost anything. And we do need to be quite mindful of the fermented foods that we purchase, because it is so fashionable now. So you can find kombucha at the 7-Eleven and the Servo, and it's not the fermented foods that you want to be eating. So you've got to be picky about it. And I'm always a big fan that you make your own, because then you know what you're making.
Yeah. So, the first time you make it, it's a learning process that's so ridiculously simple. Last night we had friends over, and I went out of the room to say goodnight to one of the kids, and I came back and my friend announced, "Oh, I just had the most delicious probiotic drink in your fridge." because my husband had shared it with her. And it was the apple juice kefir.
Oh, yum.
It's like a fizzy apple cider. It is the most delicious drink. And it's like the one that we can get into everyone with absolutely no fuss. They beg for more and more, but I have to kind of say, that's enough for today.
Yeah.
And so it's delicious. And all you need to do is literally just add 2 things together and put it in a glass jar on the bench for 24 hours and it's done.
Yeah.
It's very simple and it's very tasty. And so please don't be afraid of them is my message, guys.
Yeah. No, there's so much support and information from the Culture Wellness team when you get started fermenting, because like we've all been there. We all understand what it's like. So there's lots of videos and lots of support, and like this beautiful Facebook group, we have one where you can ask questions, and it's a nice space to, you know, to be able to ask. So did I blow it up? What happened?
Yeah. And there's a difference between wild ferments and which is cultured ferments, the right term?
Yeah.
Cultured ferments. And so you can get cultured ferments through Cultured Wellness, which is Kirsty's business, Kirsty's service that she, you know, provides everyone. That's where I get my starters from. So the difference between a wild ferment and a cultured ferment is that the wild ferment can bring in bacteria from wherever it's being grown, right? It can bring in anything from the air and just pop it in. So you don't really know what it is that you're getting. Whereas the cultured ferments, correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
They've been very strategically created with very specific strains of bacteria that support the types of like anxiety is one. Like Kirsty knows what types of bacteria strains need to go into that ferment to make sure that it's going to do what you want it to do.
You got that. That was brilliant. A classic, wonderful example of that is there was this research study, and I spoke about this in the series. If you're going to go and watch it, you'll hear me talk about this. There was a study with 40 females, and I love the fact they use females finally for a study. And there was 40 females, and there was a control group, and then there was the experiment group. So, of course, the control group just didn't have anything. And then the experiment group for this study, which was looking at anxiety and using fermented foods to reduce anxiety levels, the experiment group every day, twice a day, had a probiotic drink that had Lactobacillus rhamnosus in it, which is a very specific strain that we have in the Culture Wellness cultures. And so after a period, it was only 2 weeks after this period of time, they then, you know, did another measure and scored what was going on with this cohort. And of course, the group that didn't have the probiotic drink, you know, still had anxiety and their levels were still the same. And then the experimental group or the experiment group had a significant reduction in how they were feeling and in their anxiety score. And that was just from, you know, adding in a probiotic drink and nothing else, like not changing anything else in their life. So it wasn't like have the probiotic drink and do some meditation and cut out, you know, your McDonald's. It was just have the drink, and the scale went down so significantly. So the power of just that on its own, even without all of the other beautiful stuff that we can add in, is just so amazing. And it's just that consistency and making sure that we have it and getting in those ferments, because it starts to change the environment in the gut. And that's where the beauty is. It's like, you know, you go into your garden and you add some fertilizer in there and you start to pull out the weeds and you start to make this change to that garden, and suddenly it looks beautiful and things grow, and a new microculture starts that supports every living thing in it. And it's our guts the same. So we can affect huge change in there so quickly.
Because don't we have 500 trillion species of bacteria in our gut, which is kind of
I would hope so. Not everyone does, but we should have. Yeah.
And so when you have these fermented foods, you're literally putting that therapeutic dose of those probiotics in there, and it's very powerful in that way.
Yeah.
So we've spoken a little bit about ferments. What other types of foods can we consume that are going to support us overcoming that anxiety?
Yeah. So we can absolutely add in bone broth, which is a really healing food. But yeah, awesome. But another great one is just really beautiful fibers. So we know that the microbes within our gut live off of fibers. Like that's how they grow, that's how they multiply. And so creating that diversity means eating fiber-rich foods. So the key to that is to make sure, can you handle those fiber-rich foods? So if your gut is really dysbiotic, so it's out of balance, there's a lot of pathogenic microbes living in there, you can't introduce fiber too quickly. You've got to go low and slow, which is why the fiber challenge is just so cool, because it teaches you all of that incremental, don't go too hard too early, like a race that you haven't trained for. You can't just go bullet a gate and expect to finish and get over the end. So the fiber is a really, really important one, very important. Lots of vegetables, and then making sure that you've got your proteins and fats. So proteins are the building blocks of our body and of our ability to build those neurotransmitters, so our amino acids from protein. And then fat just calms everything down. It kind of just blunts all of that big response. So that sort of, that response of feeling in fight or flight, or feeling like everything is really big. When you have fats, when we talk about Ayurvedic medicine, fats are very grounding to the body. And it's a bit like those root vegetables. They bring you down into a really calm state. They settle your body, rather than, sort of vata foods that are very flighty, which is fruits and lighter foods that help you feel buoyant, but you don't want to feel too high and too buoyant. You want to be nice and grounded when you're feeling out of balance, when you're feeling like things are big.
Great thing about the good fats is that they make the process of making these changes to your diet so much more manageable, because they just cut those cravings right out. I remember when our daughter started on the Cultured Wellness program to address her parasites and anxiety, it was a challenge to let go of some of these foods that we just
totally a challenge.
I love my carbs, and what I've realized is that even though our family eat organic whole foods, they're still coming home from school and making pancakes out of spelt flour with maple syrup on the top, right? Like they're still feeding those parasites with those carbs and those sugars and the maple syrup and the spelt. And so, making the switch to some of these things, we had cravings, and I was eating the same way to support her and just to support myself too.
Yeah.
And what I found was that there's a hot chocolate drink that's recommended in the Guttalicious cookbook that comes from Cultured Wellness.
Yeah.
And and to be honest, it wasn't my favorite tasting hot chocolate in the world. It was not bad whatsoever. It was good.
Yeah.
It just cut all of my cravings away. The good fats from the gelatin and all the other there was 4 different sources of good fats, and that made it creamy without any dairy. Yeah. And the cacao in there as well. It was just such a beautiful way to just feel so satiated.
Yeah.
And just so at peace with everything. And so I wasn't missing.
You don't miss it. And you feel like, oh, I'm so grounded. This is so good. I'm so full. I don't need anything. But it's a very hard space to for your brain to understand, right, so I'm going to take away all my comfort foods and I'm going to feel grounded and awesome.
But I tell you what, this is now my new comfort food. I grate fresh ginger in there, which is why you can see me chewing this broth drink a little bit.
Yeah.
But then I just use a chicken broth paste, and then I put some hot water in there, and I just love it. It's just like drinking a liquid chicken soup. That hot chocolate that I just spoke about has become a comfort food for me as well. Some of those smoothies with the cultured yogurt in there, that's dead easy to get into the kids. There are some beautiful ways to get these nourishing foods in that are going to support us to really overcome and conquer anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's so simple, and you just sort of drip feed them in during the day. And someone wrote before, there's no way I could get my kids, I think it was a bit further up, my kids would never eat that, or my kids will have a reaction to that, or I don't think my kids would do it. I have worked with thousands of kids, and they all come around. It's actually the parents that are the issue. So it's like, if you guys stand out of the way and just be excited about the adventure and get them on board the adventure, you know, once their mouth biome changes and once their gut microbiome changes and it becomes more conducive for the beneficial bacteria that live in there, then that beneficial bacteria starts to send messages to your brain of the appropriate food that you want to have. So you stop having this bug war, and then you start having this sort of symbiotic behavior with what you're thinking and what you want to eat and what the beneficial bacteria in your gut and your mouth and so forth needs. So you do get there. So if you're feeling like this block of, oh my gosh, my child only eats white food, I can't even imagine them having broccoli, let alone having like a hottie or a fermented smoothie, for goodness sake. So, but you do. Like, I've never not seen a child, you know, there's a bit of bribery along the way and corruption, but, you know, we just get there every time. So,
and you know what? I can totally relate to all those parents that you've been speaking to who feel that resistance, because even though the daughter that we've just seen come through this journey, she was quite willing, you know, she was mature enough to see that she was struggling and she wanted to solve the problem. And she's always been probably the child who has gravitated most to, you know, vegetables and nice, hearty, good food. And so it wasn't she had some strong cravings because those parasites were driving that, like such strong cravings that were driving the parasites. And once she overcame that, it was much more maintainable for her from that point on. But we've since done a stool test for one of our other children who is just off the charts with her parasites and a few other things going on. And so the thought of taking her along on this program, because she's 5 years old, and if I'm going to put her on the program, I need to put everyone on the program. And honestly, that thought was a little bit overwhelming. But as I've sat with it, and as I've reflected on the types of things that we can do in an attractive way, I had to bring myself along. Like I've brought myself along, and I've now
jumped on board.
Yeah, I've realized how I can make it happen. I've realized it's not as big a deal as what I'm making it out to be. And there might be a little bit of resistance, but I can deal with that because now I've seen the success in one child, and I want the same success for the rest of the family.
Yeah, and you can't unknow that now. So you have to go there. It's just getting, you know, your armor on and just getting ready for it. And
it's a season of life. It's not forever. But having said that, I don't really want to go back to how, you know, I haven't been wanting the carbs. I haven't been wanting the sweet foods. I'm not reaching for the things that I used to reach for. And so even though you can say, look, it's only this short period of time, in reality, you're probably not going to want to go back.
No one ever goes back. It's really, really, you know, how long is this going to go for? When can I introduce food? And then, of course, you know, they come around and finish the program or whatever. It's like, oh, no, I've got no interest in that. So, yeah, it is fascinating, and it does take time. Yeah. But, you know, it's just so rewarding. And then, you know, children have a much higher nutrient level and because they're absorbing their food and they don't eat as much, which is cool. So you're not constantly feeding them 24/7. My kids just, you know, breakfast, lunch and dinner and maybe, you know, a snack in between if there's a lot of sport going on. Whereas, you know, I remember even myself going, you know, home from sport and it was just this constant like, oh, what's it to eat? I need to eat, constantly got to eat. My brother and I used to get a whole loaf of white bread and then the sandwich maker and a tin of spaghetti.
That's gross.
and make like these, you know, the toasties, the spaghetti toasties.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, where was my mum in this?
Now, there are so many questions that I'm excited to delve into. It's 8:35 where we are, Kirsty, and 9:35 down south for so many others.
Yes.
We will have to stop chatting away and dive into these questions. So, Carly, I know that you're online, and Becky. Carly and Becky are in our team at the Whole Food Collective, and they are graciously helping us out in the comments. Thank you, guys. Carly, can you please pop the questions that I may have missed in the big long thread we've got going on, can you please put them in that live document that we're sharing? And I'll start asking a couple of those questions that came through earlier.
Yeah, beautiful. So a hot hit here. So Katrina, you can start children or babies on the Culture Wellness Yogurt from 6 months and just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. So you can get kids started on fermented foods really early, but you start with the yogurt first and then you introduce more kiffers and krauts and so forth around that 18 months to 2 years mark. So
great.
Yeah. And yes, Lainey will keep us updated on how the 5-year-old goes. I'll be giving her every tip under the sun on how to handle it. So that's all good.
I was saying to Kirsty that, look, if I'm going to do this with Rosie, I literally just have to take her camping. Like, I just can't be around, because, like, our parents and I live in the same home. So there's 5 of us kids, my husband, myself, my mum and my dad. They've got a granny flat out the back. But my kids just constantly go over there. And it's not the same types of foods there. And so it's really hard to keep, just to keep her diet the way I want it to be. And so there's a lot of cravings there for her that are going to be, a challenge to manage. And so then I thought, Kirsty suggested, she's like, why don't you just take her away for a while? And so she's actually really excited to do that. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see.
And school holidays coming up is an awesome time to make those changes, because you're not worried about lunch boxes. They're not eating out of another child's lunchbox. They're not running off to the canteen or tuck shop. So there's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things that you can do. So you can get tested very easily. So go onto the Culture Wellness website. We can put up a link, or Lainey can pop something in there. You basically order the microba test that's on our website, and the test comes directly to your house. You take the sample and then you send it directly to the lab, and then they send us your results. So you can be tested anywhere in Australia, especially if you're in rural Australia. It's a wonderful way to get tested. So, and then, yes, there's a couple of great questions there about if you've got that sort of binge, excessive eating, overeating, constantly wanting to eat, the bottomless pit, the hollow legs, all of that kind of stuff, it absolutely gives me a really good indication that there is certainly some parasitic activity, there's some nutrient deficiencies, and people should be satiated after a meal, not then going on to look for an ice block or an ice cream or a sandwich or, another whole meal after the meal. If that's happening, then there's something going on there.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. I've just put a couple of links in there if people want to go and have a look at the starters, the ferment starters from Cultured Wellness, or they want to get a stool test or have a look at the programs that Cultured Wellness offer that our family are on, then you can follow those links there.
Yeah, beautiful. And yes, you can just do Culture Wellness Kickstarter program, which is just learning about all of what I've talked about, and not do the testing if it's out of your price range. There's still lots and lots of options for everybody's budget. It's just important to get started with whatever it is, even if it's just making some yogurt. It's a great place to start.
Beautiful. Rochelle's asked a question. She's got a 9-year-old daughter that has just been diagnosed with 2 gut parasites after complaining of stomach pains. She has had intense anxiety about school since she was 4 years old in kinder.
Darling.
So she's had some good patches, but it keeps coming back. And after reading my post about anxiety and parasites, she wants to know, could this be linked? Even from so many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, we've answered the other questions, but I think that was because I don't think we actually covered what the link is between parasites and anxiety. So if we could just kind of answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So what happens is that parasites and worms give off a toxic metabolite, which is ammonia. So their byproduct for their survival, like our byproduct is carbon dioxide, their byproduct is ammonia. So if you've got a lot of parasites in your gut, if you've got a lot of activity going on in there, then you're going to have very high levels of ammonia in your body. And then lots of you are probably clocking on now going, oh, I can smell that in my child's wee. Like, you know, during, you know, full moon, or when they're having a lot of behavior and tantrums, or when they're wetting the bed a lot. And then suddenly I can really smell this ammonia smell. So the ammonia can leak into the brain, and it can start to impact our neural pathways that support our mood and help us with those neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. But also, ammonia needs to be excreted out of our kidneys. And so when our kidneys are under stress from too much ammonia, then we start to feel anxious. And because we haven't got enough B6, which is what our kidneys need to eliminate that ammonia, when our B6 gets depleted, then we start to not be able to produce and make enough of those neurotransmitters and our hormones. And it's just this kind of like cascading mess after that. So yeah, like, you know, every pathway starts to break down. So really it's, you know, it's that toxic metabolite, and parasites create a really horrible environment where we can't grow great microbes, and therefore the beneficial microbes, their metabolites, like they make short chain fatty acids, which then help us to make B12, B6, and help us make all of, you know, the wonderful, wonderful factory within our body that helps our body work. So the parasites, you know, just by nature of being there, change the environment, make it really inflammatory, and stop us producing what we need for optimal health. So there's a bit of a two-prong attack. And also another sort of red flag for people out there is low iron. I see that all the time. So low iron, low vitamin D, low zinc, you know.
There's a really fascinating reason that I learned from you about why iron levels drop so much when you've got parasites. Can you quickly tell the reason for that?
Yeah. So they're very intelligent, these parasites. So they obviously want to stay within us as the host. And as you said before, like I've seen people like 75-year-olds that have had parasites ever since they were like 12. So these things are massive when they come out of the body. But so these parasites can survive. They build a biofilm layer over the top of them. And this biofilm layer is like made out of a polysaccharide sort of sugar. And the parasites and worms use a lot of iron to build up that biofilm layer. So not only is your body needing more iron because it's under this, this threat, it also then starts to deplete because this biofilm layer is being built. And then once that biofilm layer is built by whatever infection it is, you can't actually get to the problem because it's under the Star Wars force field. So, you've got to work on the biofilm to kind of break that down to expose the infection or the parasite or worms so you can actually get in there and make a change. And so this is why a lot of people are like, oh, I've had Kinbantrum, or I've gone to the doctor and I've had the, Tinizidol, or I've had, medication, but it just seems to come back all the time. And it will come back because that biofilm hasn't been dealt with. The environment in the gut hasn't been dealt with. You can't get rid of them by just taking Kinbantrum or just taking medication. It's bigger than that. You've got to sort of deal with the whole picture, the whole environment.
Yeah. And look, one of the herbal supplements that you had our daughter on was called Biofilm, which does target that specific concern. So, it's a really beautiful balanced approach when you're trying to get rid of these parasites. You're removing their food source from their sugar and carbs, but then you're also hitting them with all the things that are actually just going to kill them off.
Yeah.
it's lots of right. So Erin has a question. She says, I think school may play a part in my son's anxiety. Maybe there could be a question around how I could manage this up. My son gets gut pains when he's at school. He's on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. And when we homeschooled, he hardly had pain. Back at school again, and his gut hurts. He has a history of anxiety, and I'm wondering what I can do to help him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, number one, I would even be checking the water source at school. So a lot of schools, the water tanks, the classic old sort of, the big, water, then they don't have filters on them. And they have taps, and kids, like I've seen it all the time. Kids drink out of any tap they can find at school, or they fill up their drink bottle from the troughs, from the bathroom. And so, there is filtered water in some schools now, but a lot of those troughs and the big taps and bathrooms, some of them are fed by rainwater tanks. And rainwater tanks is just, the best way to catch a parasite, really, if they don't have filters on them. So that's one way. But another way is, as soon as our body flicks into that fight or flight response, and so for kids that even love school, it's stimulating. It puts them into that kind of high alert space of learning and big sensory environment. So as soon as you go into that fight or flight state, it literally, like a switch, like a light switch, will switch off your immune system. You cannot have your immune system working and be in fight or flight at the same time. They don't work together at the same time. And so he might be going to school and just, feeling overwhelmed. Suddenly the immune system is dampened because he's in that state of fight or flight. And then he starts to get the pain from overgrowths that he's got, because they start to fire up because the immune system has been dampened. So very common, very, very common to see that. So there is a multi-pronged sort of attached to, way of dealing with that. But yeah, getting to the root cause of every time his immune system turns off, it seems like this, big infection flares up, need to deal with that.
I am constantly amazed at how these three things affect our immune system so much: stress and lack of sleep and sugar. They're just such pillars of our immune system.
It's like the trifecta, isn't it? Wow, someone's written there, I see this every day, but it still blows my mind. My 5-year-old has low IgA levels, so that's your immune response levels. Low iron, is anxious and has sensory issues. Are they all related and possible parasites? So yes, obviously, I need to see a test, but that's just textbook. What you've written there is absolutely textbook for what we would see come through. And yes, we would test, don't guess, and then go in and make some big changes to that. But that's a very, very classic picture.
Kirsty, should we go for 10 more minutes just to take us to 9 o'clock? And then we should finish up for all those people down south as well, as Kirsty's time.
Yeah.
Carly, I can't see those questions coming through on the live document, so I'll just go on the last question that we've got that was previously submitted, and then we'll just pick out what we can see on the thread. So Cassandra said, this is such a good question. She wants to know how anti-anxiety medication affects the gut and what can be done to help maintain good gut health during the period that medication is required.
Yes. Well, interestingly, it depends the medication that you're using, but some of the medication actually turns off the signals from the brain to the gut to tell the gut that it's stimulated and for it to increase motility or cause inflammation. So in some ways, on a mechanical level, some of the anti-anxiety medication actually supports the gut being stressed and helps to calm everything down. So they're in the sort of allopathic medicine at the moment, there's kind of this big push that if someone's got IBD or if they've got gut issues, to actually prescribe anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication because it seems to calm the farm. But really what that's telling us is that connection, that top-down and bottom-up approach. And we can do that in other ways once, everything's calmed down and when the time is right and under support coming off that medication. So yes, absolutely, we can make some big changes there. And whilst you're moving through that, getting on the fermented foods, practicing all of your a top-down approach to calming the body, but also creating that right environment. So when you come off your medication, then you've got all of those systems in place.
Thank you for answering that, because I think that's something that a lot of people, I mean, doctors are so quick to diagnose, and sometimes there's a place for that, but often we're just dishing out these medications like they're candy.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to see that there are so many people on these medications that perhaps could simply and powerfully be helped with some of these lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
I know that wasn't there a study recently? You did touch on a similar topic just a few minutes ago, but correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a study recently that found that probiotics were just as powerful as antidepressant medication for anxiety, right?
Yeah. And then that's, you know, it's very important to sort of mention that if you are on medication at the moment, you can really successfully, and obviously under supervision, you can really successfully start to reduce that in conjunction with working on building up your health, building up your gut microbiome, building up your nutrient levels. And there's a really wonderful, you know, pathway forward for being able to successfully reduce your medication and then come off your medication, obviously under supervision and all those sorts of things. But you know, I just want people to know that it's not like, oh, now I just have to take this for the rest of my life. There's really great pathways to move into more of a natural food as medicine space, which will support your whole body holistically rather than just this sort of one single, you know, bullet approach. So, you know, take hope if you're feeling like, whoa, this is a lot to take in and to kind of rebuild. It absolutely can be done. And, you know, we support people all the time through that process. You need support. You need to know, you know, have care with that, but it can be done, which is a really cool thing to know.
That is exciting to know.
Yeah.
Facebook user, sorry, I don't know your name. She says, I've recently had a standard stool culture with the GP, which showed a couple of common parasites. And she's considering a generic parasite cleanse diet with a bunch of question marks. What would your advice be there?
Well, of course, my advice is I'd prefer you to do the cultured wellness one because it works so well. So I'd just be really mindful of doing generic parasite parasite elimination processes and taking certain parasite supplements. If you're going to look into those, just make sure that they really understand and break down the biofilm. So number one, so whatever you're going to do, if it's generic, is there a biofilm component of it? And also, does the component factor in the life cycle of the worms or the parasites? Like these guys, they multiply, they lay eggs, they grow, they have a whole phase approach. So just taking like one big bomb on one day is not going to do it. So I have seen people who've got significant parasitic infections. You do really need to do probably 3 or 4 cleanses to really knock it on its head and get rid of them. The environment, the food, everything needs to be approached to get rid of them. So they're tricky. They're really, you need to get it right. So I'm not a fan of the generic ones just because I always end up seeing people they come to us afterwards and like, I tried this and it didn't work. It's like, don't waste your time.
I've also found that GPs are a godsend in many ways, but they don't have the time to really specialize in a lot of these different topics, and so it's hard sometimes for them to really get into the nitty-gritty specifics of what you actually need.
Yeah, they haven't done any training in that area, so we can't expect them to be able to support us in that when they've had very limited training. Some have gone on and done environmental and nutritional medicine, and they're amazing doctors that can give you more of a broader approach. But a GP is great for getting the testing if needed, but from there, unless they specialize in that area, we can't expect them to know the detail because it's just not their bread and butter of what they do every day.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do some rapid fire questions for 5 minutes. So we'll just try to keep it. Well, I'll ask the questions that you can have quick answers for. Fermented foods give my daughter headaches, someone said.
So
I know the reason for that. So let's
yes. So that is a classic. A lot of people would say, "Oh, that's a histamine approach," and rah rah. So it's a die-off approach, and I won't go into it, but there's that many videos out there of me talking about it. You can find something. But when there's a dysbiotic gut, it'll release those metabolites that I was talking about before, which can be toxic, and it can make you feel a bit yuck, and it can give you a headache. So if the headache's happening from fermented foods, then you need to investigate your gut and do a gut test.
Okay, great answer.
It doesn't mean that she's he's allergic to it, to not have it. It means the body's sending a message, and let's investigate.
There seems to be a common theme, is that if your body has a response to something, maybe you need more of it, not less.
Yes, definitely.
Someone else asked, what was the name of the Facebook group for fermenting support? It is the Cultured Wellness Community, or just Cultured Wellness Community?
I think it's Cultured Wellness Community.
You should know, Kirsty. Come on.
Oh my God. Let me just double check.
While you're checking, someone else said, and this is a great question, how do you sell this idea to a teenager to have their poop tested?
Well, just going back, it is just Cultured Wellness Community. So whether it's a teenager, whether it's a husband, whether it's a boyfriend, whoever it is, whether it's a grandma, the best way to encourage and inspire someone is to find out what is the thing they hold most closely to them, and what's their sort of trigger, or what's their overarching sort of point. And for teenagers, a lot of the time it's skin. For teenagers, a lot of the time it's being strong, being fit, all of those kinds of things. So you've got to find their motivation. And so lots of teenagers have skin issues, and that all comes from the gut microbiome and from liver detoxification issues. So yeah, my suggestion is find the motivation, find that point. So I was talking about my dad before, but my dad, he wouldn't change his diet, but he was heading down the Alzheimer's pathway that all of his cousins have now passed away from Alzheimer's, and he's only 75, and his mother passed away from Alzheimer's, and all his grandparents and aunties and uncles did. And so Dad just wouldn't change. And then I found the motivator, and I said to him, Dad, Mum and I don't want to be changing your nappies when you can't remember to go to the toilet. So sort it out. And that was the thing. He was just like, So with teenagers, it's, bad skin, or it's, not being confident, or not being able to sleep over at someone's house because their gut's always feeling crap, or they've got, an issue. So find the motivation, and you'll get there. It's just working with them to find that.
For our daughter, the motivation was sorting out the bloating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And also the stool tests aren't what they used to be. They are quite discreet. They come in this beautiful box, and it's
like a present, right? You open up this box, and
it's lovely. It's a gift, and it's it looks so quite luxurious, and it's really tough to smear, right? I mean, the 5-year-old did do a different type of stool test that did require a bit more substance to it, but the microbiota test was literally just a smear, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it isn't walking in to your doctor's surgery with a big tub of your own stool. It has progressed a long way since then. So.
And they don't have to see anyone. They just put it in the post and they send it away. But what a great example with your dad talking about epigenetics and talking about how he's now turning himself around despite that genetic tendency.
Talk about genetics. It's there's no, it's pretty obvious here what's going on. But he completely turned it around 5-10 years ago, and is still teaching and working at 75, and he's as sharp as anything. He's completely reshaped his brain with no signs of it slowing up. If anything, we call him Benjamin Button, which is hilarious. But Oh, I need to watch that movie again because I call him that, and I'm like, I can't quite remember the character. I hope it's still okay to call him that. So,
I watched it fairly recently. It's a fascinating movie.
yeah.
Okay, there are so many questions, and Kirsty and I love to answer questions, and we don't like to leave them unanswered, but it's getting so late. There's two that are kind of in the same theme, and then we might just need to cut it off. But I'm sorry, but here's a question that seems to be coming through a lot. Susie and Free to Roam have said, can we get the recipe for the fermented apple juice? And someone else liked the idea of that as well. Can you please share? So literally look, I'm going to put the link again in here. This is for the ferment cultures that you can get from Kirsty at Cultured Wellness. You'll see on that page there's a few different ones. The apple juice kefir is the one that I spoke about. That was like the fizzy apple cider. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But our family also really love the coconut water kefir. They have the same bacterial strains, right? Whereas the cultured yogurt has a different type of bacterial strain or strains in it, and it will target different types of health goals that you have. And so we like to combine. We either have the apple juice kefir or the coconut water kefir at some point in the day, and we'll also just make sure we get the yogurt in as well.
Yeah.
But in a nutshell, you just put the starter in. It's like 1 cup of apple juice kefir. You just put it in with some fresh apple juice, put it in the jar, and then you let it sit overnight or 24 hours, as long as it takes. And there's instructions when you receive it, and there's a video. What I'm going to do tomorrow, I will send a replay of this around tomorrow. I'll put the links in there, and I'll also put some links to some instructional videos that Kirsty's put together. So it's just dead easy, and you can just click through and watch like a 1-minute video on how to make that kefir. So it's simple.
Oh, thank you for doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, of course. Like, it's just such a great, easy way to support people's health, and I just love that people are here learning about it.
I know. It's so cool. It's so cool.
I would love to just do a little quick recap. We spoke for the first little section, we spoke about the causes. We touched on how genetics can play a part, but how we can change our genetic predisposition through epigenetics, through our lifestyle, through our diet choices, and all those beautiful things like breath work and all those things that we spoke about. We also spoke about the two other causes of anxiety, which can be the top-down approach from the brain down to the gut. And we also spoke about the bottom-up approach, from our gut, which leads to the anxiety. Sorry, I got that muddled. And so there are a few things that can be the top-down approach. You can interject, Kirsty, but it's stress, it's trauma, it's what else is there from top-down?
Whoa. You've just frozen there.
Top-down. Oh, okay, no problem. I was just recapping what the top-down approach is, and I said that there was stress and trauma can cause anxiety in that top-down approach. From the bottom-up approach, we've got things like parasites. We've got things like a dysbiotic gut. We've got things like poor diet. What else was there from the bottom-up approach that can cause anxiety?
Yeah, so just mainly that dysbiotic gut and the undigested food and the immune system not functioning effectively with the wrong food choices coming in, inflammatory foods.
And speaking about those foods, we spoke about the foods to avoid being things like we wouldn't be surprised at the sugar, the alcohol, the processed carbs and the white foods and the packet foods. All those things can contribute to that anxiety. The foods to welcome in more in our lives, we've spoken a lot about ferments, the good fats, the proteins, the broth, all those beautiful foods we can welcome in to support us when we're experiencing anxiety. And so I hope that gives you a really great starting place tonight, guys, and so that you can start with those ferments, or if you're ready to dive in, I'll give you that link again tomorrow where you can look at what Cultured Wellness offer, and you can sort of lean on my experience with our family in saying that I'm confident that, like, I'm not going to take forever talking about it now because I actually may cry. Like Kirsty, I remember speaking to you 6 months ago, and it was just off the back of a live just like this that we'd done inside the Fibre Challenge. And I said, Kirsty, can you just listen to this?
Yes.
You just hang around for 5 minutes. I'm just dying here. I don't know what to do. My kids, 2 of my kids are suffering in these ways. And he said, Lainey, this is our bread and butter. Let me help you. Just go and get the test and then we'll talk. And so I went and got the test. Took me forever to go and get it.
It always takes everyone forever.
And you know, it's been a short time later, and we've just seen a massive improvement. And like I said, it's not perfect. It's not 100% transformation. There are still things we have to work on. But we're talking about anxiety tonight, and that has absolutely disappeared from our daughter's life, and that's massive. It's absolutely massive. So I'm really grateful to you and for the work that you and your team do. From a personal level, it's just been mind-blowing. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for allowing me to share with all your community. It's just been so wonderful. So
awesome. And guys, I'm really sorry for the questions that we didn't get to. If there's a question in there that you really do want to dive into that we haven't been able to touch tonight, feel free to reach out to Cultured Wellness, and I'm sure they would be happy to chat with you, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You can either email us at info@culturedwellness.com. Yeah, you can contact us through the community group or through Facebook. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us. And yeah, that's what we love doing most, is supporting people around rebuilding, like, you know, what's happening for your family, just rebuilding, getting back to resilient, and just getting on with life and not having to worry about struggling with concerns. So yeah, reach out. There's lots of information out there.
Beautiful. And guys, just look out for my email tomorrow. I'll send everything through so it's in one neat place.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time tonight, Kirsty. We really appreciate you and your expertise in this area that is so important.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night.
You've still got me. It just dropped out. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.